Hi everyone, my name is Taylor. I'm an intern here at Ground Education, and today we are going to be reading The Curious Garden by Peter Brown. The Curious Garden by Peter Brown. I wonder what this book will be about. It looks like some bricks and some plants. There once was a city without gardens or trees or greenery of any kind. Most people spent their time indoors. As you can imagine, it was a very dreary place. I can't see any plants on this page. However, there was one boy who loved being outside. Even on drizzly days while everyone else stayed inside, you could always find Liam happily splashing around through his neighborhood. It was one such morning that Liam made several surprising discoveries. He was wandering around the old railway, as he did from time to time, when he stumbled upon a dark stairwell leading up to the tracks. The railway had stopped working years ago, and since Liam had always wanted to explore the tracks, there was only one thing for the curious boy to do. I think he's going to go explore the tracks. He's going to go up here. Liam ran up the stairs, pushed open the door, and stepped out onto the railway. The first thing he saw was a lonely patch of color. Wildflowers and plants were the last things he had expected to find up there, but when he took a closer look, it became clear that the plants were dying. They needed a gardener. Liam may not have been a gardener, but he knew that he could help. So he returned to the railway the very next day and got to work. The flowers nearly drowned, and he had a few pruning problems, but the plants patiently waited while Liam found better ways of gardening. And it looks like he's watering, he's pruning. That means cutting off some of the branches that are dying so they can grow new ones. And he's singing to them. Oh, that's nice. As the weeks rolled by, Liam began to feel like a real gardener, and the plants began to feel like a real garden. He figured out how to take care of them. Most gardens stay in one place, but this was no ordinary garden. With miles of open railway ahead of it, the garden was growing restless. It wanted to explore. The tough little weeds and mosses were the first to move. They popped up farther and farther down the tracks, and were closely followed by the more delicate plants, like the flowers. Over the next few months, Liam and the Curious Garden explored every corner of the railway. Wow, look, so now we have garden all the way down the tracks. Wow. And here he is in his little garden that he built. Remember what it started from, a little patch on the ground, and now it's huge. He looks happy, and so do the plants. And here he is exploring even more of the railway. Now it looks like they're in the city. And plants are moving down. I wonder what's going to happen. Wow, after spending his spring and summer and autumn with the garden, Liam's time on the railway was finally interrupted by winter. Heavy blankets of snow fell on the city that season, and for the first time since he'd become a gardener, Liam could not visit the plants. It seems like they're sleeping, maybe. Rather than waste his winter worrying about the garden, Liam spent it preparing for spring. It looks like he's looking how to be a good gardener. After 3 cold months, the snow finally began to melt, and Liam rolled his new gardening gear over to the railway. Wow, he looks much more prepared than last year. Winter had taken a toll on the garden. Oh, see, now it looks like the plants are kind of dead. But guess what? But thanks to Liam's planning, his handy new tools, and a little help from the sun, the plants soon awoke from their winter sleep. So they weren't dead after all, they were just sleeping. And there he is singing again. I think singing really helps the plants grow. The garden had always wanted to explore the rest of the city, and that spring it was finally ready to make its move. Once again, the tough little weeds and mosses set out first. They popped up farther and farther from the railway, and they were closely followed by the more delicate plants, just like last year. The garden was especially curious about old forgotten things. Like this old car, this old window or building, little cracks in the sidewalk. A few plants popped up where they didn't belong, like this stop sign and the fire hydrant. We can't have plants there because they help keep people safe. Others mysteriously popped up all at once. Interesting. Here's a pot being given to an old man. And some mysterious guy is dropping off plants somewhere else in the city. I wonder who that is. But the most surprising things that popped up were the new gardeners. Wow, so it looks like other people like to garden too and help the plants grow. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 just in this building. And so many more on the other buildings. And here's the flowers and the plants growing along the railroad tracks. And here's all of Liam's friends. And here it looks like a bunch of pictures we can look at. So here we see that the moss and the plants and the flowers grew all along the steps. That must feel good on your feet. And here's people having a picnic with the plants. And here's people hopping on giant lily pads. That looks fun. And here's a huge, huge tree going all the way up the side of the buildings. And there's even houses in the tree, little tree houses. And people made little shapes out of animals. Or rather, they made animals out of plants. And here you can see a lot of plants growing along the building. I think it looks better that way. I think it looks more healthy. Many years later, the entire city had blossomed. But of all the new gardens, Liam's favorite was where it all began, on the railroad tracks. Oh, and now there's a big tree. That's very cool. Wow, and here is the city now after Liam's little adventure, or rather big adventure. And if we look at this page, it looks exactly like the first page except with all the plants. So let's look at that. So here's where we started. It was a very dreary place. And then at the end of our story in Liam's adventure, not so dreary anymore. The end. If you'd like to stay to listen to the author's note, Peter Brown wrote something for you guys. It often seems impossible for nature to thrive in a city of concrete and brick and steel. But the more I've traveled and the closer I've looked at the world around me, the more I've realized that nature is always eagerly exploring the places we've forgotten. You can find flowers in fields and even small forests growing wild in every city. You just have to look for them. On the west side of Manhattan, there is an old elevated railway called the High Line. Its trains rumbled high above the city streets for decades, but in 1980, the High Line was shut down and forgotten. Without people and trains getting in the way, nature was free to redecorate. Over the years, the rusty rails and gravel slowly gave way to the wildflowers and trees. And if you look at the railway today, you'll see a lush garden that curves above the streets and between buildings, kind of like the story we read. From grass bursting through cracks in a sidewalk or a tuft of goldenrod clinging to a clinging to a brick wall, to a meadow winding along an abandoned railway, nature can thrive in the unlikeliest of places. All of this made me curious. What would happen if an entire city decided to truly cooperate with nature? How would that city change? How would it all begin? And maybe it begins with someone like Liam. The end.